Suspect Convictions is brought to you by ZipRecruiter. Go to ziprecruiter.com/suspect to get started today. Suspect Convictions is brought to you by HelloFresh. Go to HelloFresh.com and enter promo code SUSPECT30 and get $30 off your first order.
Nearly 20 years ago, the body of a 3-year-old Bloomington, Illinois girl was found in her father's apartment. Christina McNeil's father, Barton, was ultimately convicted of murdering his daughter and has spent 19 years in prison. The day of his daughter's death, Barton McNeil detailed to detectives his theory that his estranged girlfriend had murdered his daughter, breaking into his apartment to do so. Any evidence pertaining to Barton McNeil's theory was not allowed at his trial, which was a bench trial. More than a decade later, the ex-girlfriend was convicted for the 2011 murder of her mother-in-law. Is Barton McNeil serving time for a crime he did not commit? Investigative journalist Scott Reeder is digging deep, reviewing court records and talking to those tied to the case, including Barton McNeil. Untangling the web of Christina McNeil's murder. I'm Willis Kern, your host for Season 2 of Suspect Convictions.
I cannot convey any better the traumatic words that you'd hear on this 911 tape. And when I hear them today, my blood runs cold.
911, what's your emergency?
I need an ambulance. My daughter's dying, I think.
Rescue is needed. 3-year-old female child, unconscious, not breathing.
Christina!
He is wasting away a life in a jail for a murder he didn't commit, and worse, for his own daughter with whom he loved.
There is a whole bunch of evidence now that links Masuk to the crime scene.
There is absolutely no evidence of any forced entry, any breaking in, and according to the defendant, the only people in that house with permission were himself and Christina.
The lifeless body of 3-year-old Christina McNeil was found in her father's apartment the morning of June 16, 1998. A window fan lay on the floor near the bed where Christina's prone body was discovered. Small cuts were found in the bedroom window screen just above the latches that locked the screen into its frame. Her father, Barton McNeil, called 911.
911, what's your emergency?
I need an ambulance. I need it fast. 1106 North Evans. My daughter's dying, I think.
Okay, all right, now first you gotta help me out here now. Okay, calm yourself down, okay? Now how old is your daughter?
3, I think she's dead.
3 years old? Okay, all right, now hold on just a second now, and then I'm gonna get to the rescue unit, and then I'm gonna come back to the phone to get some additional information, okay? Does the color of her skin, is it blue?
No.
It's not blue? Okay, is she breathing?
No.
Okay, and she's 3 years old?
Yes.
Okay, all right, now stay on the phone with me now, so don't hang up now, okay? Okay, hold on. Rescue is needed. 1106 North Evans Street. 3-year-old female child, unconscious, not breathing. Color of skin presently is unknown. 1106 North Evans, 3951 response. 3951 response. Okay, all right, sir. She's 3 years old?
Yes.
Okay, all right. Do you have her in your arms?
No.
Okay, is near the phone with you?
Yes.
Okay, and is she breathing?
No.
She's not breathing at all. Okay. Okay, hold on just a second, sir. 1 Adam 1, that comes.
Christina!
1 Adam 1, 1106 North Evans. 3-year-old child, not breathing, unconscious. 3 North, 16's en route if you can assist. 1106 North Evans. Okay, sir. All right. She is now unconscious. Okay, all right. And you can tell she's not breathing at all? Okay. What I need for you is put your child on her back.
She's on her back?
She's on her back? Okay, all right. Now, do not put your hand underneath her back.
You'll send that to me, I can respond.
Okay, now. Okay, what's your phone number there?
828-1873.
1873.
Here's the ambulance.
Okay, now that's fine. Okay, now what I want you to do then is have her on her back, put your hand on her forehead and then on the cheekbone, then tilt the head back. Okay?
Have the hands on the forward. Cheekbone, tilt the head back.
And tilt the head back a little bit there, okay? All right. Okay, now you need to help me out now. You got to keep yourself calm down here so you can help me. Okay, all right, now. I need to have you. Hold on here, let me see if I can tell Rescue what's going on here.
I'm right behind Rescue here.
Okay, all right, now. One out of one, catch one and two. Okay, all right, now.
Headquarters, 3-1-15, 1023, bro. Go get the ambulance.
Okay, stay there?
Yeah.
Okay.
Make sure the door's locked or not, just it.
Okay, see if that door's unlocked.
Hurry!
Okay, are they there? Okay.
Here goes another one. Hurry! I got hang up now, okay?
Okay, are they there? Okay, all right, thank you.
This is Suspect Convictions. I'm Willis Kern with Illinois-based investigative journalist Scott Reeder, who's here. He brought you Suspect Convictions Season 1 and is back with Season 2, looking at the murder of Christina McNeil. Scott, what's your take on what we just heard there with the 911 call with Barton McNeil?
Wasn't that just compelling audio? I mean, I originally, when I was investigating the case, read the transcript. And when I read the transcript, I was skeptical, very skeptical. And I thought, well, this guy could be just going through the motions. And then I listened to the audio and I'm like, this sounds like a desperate father to me. I mean, this sounds like somebody just overwhelmed with grief and trying to function to try to save his daughter.
And we should point out that these tapes were not heard at his trial, correct?
That is correct.
So basically what the judge had to go on here was the fact that this man found his daughter who was dead. And that's really it, right?
He was presented as being home alone with his daughter in this apartment. And that was what they went on. It was basically a prosecution based on proximity. The fact that he was there with her by himself. And they tried very hard to argue that there was an intruder in the apartment. They tried to present his ex-girlfriend as the intruder, and the judge blocked all that from being presented as in the case.
Now let's go back and listen again to one specific segment of that 911 call, and that's the part where Barton is on the phone. And it sounds like he's waiting for the 911 operator to contact someone, and you can hear him actually crying out. Let's listen to that again.
1 Adam 1, that comes.
Christina! Christina!
One Adam 1, 1106 North Evans, 3-year-old child, not breathing, unconscious, 3 North, 16's en route if you can assist. 1106 North Evans. Okay, sir. All right.
Now, Scott, in hearing that, you have to think to yourself, is this genuine or is he acting? If he's acting, it's a really good job, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's what runs through my mind. I mean, Willis, you and I are both fathers. I mean, what's your reaction to it?
It sounds like he's genuinely upset. And I suppose anyone who finds their child dead in the morning is going to be upset. But if he had killed her, could he have pulled off that 911 call the way he did? I'm not sure I know the answer to that.
I don't know either. I'll be honest with you. Listening to that, I can't. It's very hard for me to believe I'm listening to the voice of the killer. I mean, that's just my reaction listening to this. But, you know, I also have seen killers get on the witness stand and just weep as they talk about the loss of their loved one and say that wasn't them. And, the prosecutor will say, it was crocodile tears. Their emotions seem to be genuine, but the evidence was clear in those particular cases that the person was guilty. So it's very difficult to go solely on that. But, man, does he sound passionate. And, man, I don't get a sense of deception whatsoever in listening to that. Do you, Willis?
No, I don't. And I guess I'm left with the sense of wondering how his trial would have ensued had this audio been played before the judge. In this case, since it was a bench trial, the judge was the person making the disposition of guilt or innocence here. How would he have thought about Barton McNeil's innocence or guilt based on hearing that at the outset?
Or better yet, if you're the defense attorney, why didn't they ask for a jury, and why wasn't this presented to the jury? To me, this is, compelling stuff.
That was compelling audio, Scott, and there was more of it to come later in the day. Barton had gone away from his home for a few hours to visit with his ex-wife. He came back home. He noticed some cuts in the screen. Maybe you want to just briefly describe what he saw.
I don't think there's any dispute that there's cuts in the screen. I mean, that showed up on the police video early on, but Barton noticed it there. There were cuts right above the levers on this old window screen where if somebody was breaking in, they could stick their fingers through and push the levers from the inside and open up the window.
So he saw obvious signs of forced entry.
That's how he interpreted it. Prosecutors said, well, that could have been there 2 years ago. Or could have been he just wanted to get into his house earlier in the year when he locked himself out.
So after the detectives come out and they talk to him and the coroner's at the crime scene and they all leave and they go back to their offices, later in the day, he calls back on 911 because he has this theory that Christina has been murdered by someone who gained forced entry. And so he wants the police to come out and review the scene with that in their minds. And so he calls 911 again, and this is how it sounds.
Sort of an emergency. What's your address? 1106 North Prairie. My name is Barton McNeil. My daughter was found dead by me this morning at this address. The detectives were here, the coroner, everything. I need a homicide detective, please. I believe the detective here might have been from homicide. I don't know. I think the detective comes when there's the death of a person where the cause is undetermined.
Bart, what's your phone number there?
My telephone number is 828-1783.
Okay.
I have reasons to believe now that I am convinced that she was murdered, and I need a detective here immediately.
Okay.
I don't know if they saw this or not, but I just discovered it myself.
Okay. Now, is that a house or an apartment?
An apartment house. I'll be waiting outside. It's 1106, apartment number 2, North Evans. Please, hurry.
1106 North Evans?
Yes.
Okay. I thought you said North Prairie.
I probably did. It's North Evans.
1106 North Evans, apartment number 2.
Yes.
Okay, I'll get him out for you.
Thank you. Bye.
Let me just say, did they find a child dead this morning? On North Evans?
So they did, you say?
Yeah, I'm asking. I had a guy call up and said that he found his daughter dead this morning.
His daughter dead?
At 1106 North Evans, apartment number 2.
Yeah?
And he said that the detective's been out there, the coroner's been out there, but he is now convinced that it was a murder. He's found evidence there, and he wants a homicide detective immediately.
Well,
I don't know what detectives are working tonight.
Well, two of them went to Iowa. McKinley's up there. Do you want to have him call back to talk to McKinley, or what? Or you got a phone number for him?
Yeah, I got a phone number for him, but he's pretty hysterical, so whether I send an officer or get a detective to
I think a detective. Well, what's his number?
It's 828-1783.
I seen where they did some kind of crime scene thing, but I'll get one of the detectives or somebody calling.
Okay.
What's his name?
It's Bart.
Bart?
Bart McNeil.
McNeil, okay.
Yeah, 1106 North Evans, apartment number 2.
Okay. All right.
Thanks. Bye.
So there we have the police detectives reacting to the dispatcher, notifying them that, hey, Barton McNeil is called back about his daughter's death. He thinks it's a murder. He wants him to come out. What's your take on that particular exchange?
Well, I think the thing to remember here is The first day, they thought the death was from natural causes. And it's the father who's found this evidence of a cut screen that has him holler, "No, it's a murder. Somebody broke into this house and murdered my daughter." And he's calling in and he's driving this home. Now,
you know what I'm struck by, Scott, is the fact that here it is several hours later, yet he's still out of breath. He's still very excited. Now, I don't know how to react if my child were to die. I think it's telling that he still is out of breath. He still is very emotional about this as he calls in the second time.
Yeah, I can't imagine how I would have reacted either, Willis. I mean, I got 3 daughters, and I just don't know what normal is in a reaction to something like this.
But again, this was not presented as evidence at his trial.
No, it wasn't. But here's the question I have is, okay, let's say you murdered your daughter and the police are treating it as natural causes. Would you call in there and say, "No, she was murdered"? If I was sitting there thinking, "Hey, they're treating it as natural causes, maybe they won't look too hard at this and I'll get away with it." If I was the one that killed her, I mean...
If he did the murdering, why would he open the murder door, basically?
Yeah, that's what's running through my mind here. I mean, and I've talked to Bart a number of times. He's a very intelligent man. Why would you even suggest it's murder if you were the murderer? I mean, that doesn't make sense to me. But not all murders or crimes make sense, I also will add. Folks, I've been hiring people for the last 20-some years. It's difficult. I have interviewed so many candidates that I liked, but then found out were really bad matches once they came to work for me. And I missed some really quality people who applied, but just didn't have the right thing on the resume that they could have put on there. It's really difficult to hire the right person for the right job. That's why I like ZipRecruiter. With ZipRecruiter, you can post your job to over 100 of the web's leading job boards with just one click. And you can get over 100 postings out there on the internet. Then ZipRecruiter puts its smart matching technology to work, actively notifying qualified candidates about your job within minutes of posting so they receive the best possible matches. ZipRecruiter doesn't depend on the right candidates finding you, it finds them. No wonder 80% of employers who post on ZipRecruiter get a quality candidate through the site in just one day. And the easy-to-use ZipRecruiter dashboard lets you manage your hiring process from start to finish, all in one place. ZipRecruiter, the smartest way to hire. Find out today why ZipRecruiter has been used by growing businesses of all sizes and industries to find the most qualified job candidates with immediate results. And right now, my listeners can post jobs on ZipRecruiter for free. That's right, for free. Just go to ZipRecruiter.com/suspect. Again, that's ZipRecruiter.com/suspect. Folks, I'm going to be really honest with you. I'm not a very adventuresome cook. I'm kind of a meat and potatoes guy. And then this last year or so, we subscribed to HelloFresh. It's a really convenient service that you can subscribe to, and you get to pick what day you want your food delivered to your house. So you're saying, well, I don't want the commitment of having a subscription to something like this. Well, it's really convenient to put a pause on your subscription, like if you're going on a vacation or something. All of the ingredients come pre-measured in handy labeled meal kits, so you know which ingredients go with which recipe. And for somebody who's not a real experienced cook like me, that's a godsend. And the package is delivered right to your door in a recyclable, insulated package. You're going to say to yourself, well, how do they know what I want to eat? I mean, everybody has different tastes. That's why they offer different recipes and they offer different meal plans. For example, you can choose classic, veggie, or family. Classic is a variety of meat, fish, and seasonal produce. Veggie, as you probably can guess, is vegetarian recipes with plant-based proteins, grains, and seasonal produce. And family, that's the one we subscribe to. You get quick, easy meals with all the yum-worthy flavor the whole family will love. It's also something for me and my wife to do together. We enjoy cooking in the kitchen and talking and trying different things. Go to HelloFresh.com and enter promo code SUSPECT30 and get $30 off your first order.
Let's talk a little bit now about the second part of that audio that we just heard, where the dispatcher is contacting the detectives, trying to have them check in with Bart, go out to his house because he wants them to come out and check out the murder. What's your take on that exchange?
You didn't have a sense one way or the other about it. I mean, you could tell that, this is Bloomington, Illinois. How many murders do you have a year?
Well, 20 years ago, there are more now than there were 20 years ago, but 20 years ago, you could go a whole year with one, maybe two.
Okay. The detective they got on the phone seems befuddled when he hears that somebody's calling about a murder. I mean, what's he talking about? Is that the reaction you got?
Well, it's even the reaction to the death, because I heard him repeat what the dispatcher said. The dispatcher said, 3-year-old child was found dead. Oh, 3-year-old child found dead. Okay, it's the first I've heard about this.
Yeah, so, I mean, obviously the cops are not treating this initially as a murder. I mean, if
they're not treating it as a crime case.
No, they're not treating it as a crime case. They're treating it as a medical incident. And so that's what's running through my mind is the cops are pretty laid back about it. They don't seem to be particularly anxious. If they thought a 3-year-old had been murdered in their community, in a community that only has 1 or 2 murders a year, a nice white-collar community, wouldn't they be like, oh, yeah, that's the Christina McNeil case. We're going to be out right on this.
Well, no cops came out to his place, and Bart was upset, and he was tired of waiting, so he called a couple of other times to 911. He called the non-emergency number. Let's listen to those calls now.
Yes, I need homicide detective. I called the non-emergency number.
Yeah, it is.
Yes.
Okay.
Are they on their way?
Yeah, I talked to Lieutenant Levinson. He was going to get a detective to come out there.
Oh, please hurry.
Okay.
Please. Oh, thank you.
All right. Bye-bye. 911 emergency?
This is Bart again.
Yes, sir.
Sorry to keep bothering you.
That's okay.
Is somebody on their way?
Yeah, they haven't called you yet or come by there yet?
No.
Okay. Let me call back down, Lieutenant, and find out. He was going to get a detective as soon as I hung up the phone with you the first time, okay?
Okay.
I'll call back.
Thank you.
Yep. Bye.
Sutherland.
Hey, is Livingston around there?
Yes, who may I say is calling?
Tell him that Metro McLean County Centralized Communications is calling.
In regards to?
A homicide that occurred this morning.
In the city of Bloomington?
In the city of Bloomington.
Would that be in North 7th Street?
1106, number 2.
Hang on just a minute. I'll see if he's available.
Thank you.
Sir, Jacksonville. That's Paulson Communications. He would like to talk to you about a possible homicide that occurred this morning. Are you taking calls today? Yeah, I already talked to him about it. Hello.
Hey.
Yeah.
He's called back twice now. Is somebody going out there?
No, McKinley's going to call him on the phone.
Okay.
No, not that I know of.
Okay. He's calmed me down a little bit from the last time I just hung up the phone, but nobody contacted him yet, and he's a little worried.
What the hell's his problem?
He has reason to believe that it was a homicide.
Well, they did a report on unattended death. They did the crime scene on it.
Yeah. He said he found something. He didn't know if they had seen it or not. So he wanted a homicide detective out.
Next time he calls, just give him McKinley's direct phone number, because McKinley's going to call him.
You know that number?
Yeah, it's 378. Well, 434-2378.
2378. Okay. Thanks.
And McKinley's going to call him here in a minute.
Cool. Thank you. Bye.
Sergeant McKinley.
Hey, Randy, this is Jack.
Yeah.
Have you contacted that guy Bart about that? 1106 North Evansville this morning.
Contacted who?
Bart McNeil. Lieutenant Levinson said he'd give you the guy's phone
Oh,
a little bit.
no, I have just getting ready to call him.
Okay, great. Well, he's called me 3 times now, and he said that he's found some evidence. He believes now that he's positive it was a homicide, and he wanted a homicide detective to come out to his address.
Okay.
Okay. Well, I just want to make sure that you have the number. All right. Thanks. Bye.
So there we hear, Scott, we hear Bart calling in a couple of times. He seems a little perturbed that nobody's come out.
A little perturbed? A little perturbed?
Helped him a bit. But let's talk a little bit about maybe not so much his demeanor, because, he wants action right now. This is a big deal for him. His daughter's died. He thinks she was murdered. The police aren't responding. What's your take on the way the police sounded on the 911 calls there, asking for them to respond to McNeil's house because he wanted them to investigate a murder?
Well, first thing that ran through my mind was when Bart asked for a homicide detective. I doubt very much that Bloomington had a designated homicide detective at the time. They certainly don't have a homicide division. This isn't Law and Order. This is a mid-sized town that very rarely has violent crime in the middle of Illinois, reacting to assertion by the father that there was a murder that took place. And did you catch that lieutenant who said, "What the hell's his problem?"
Yeah.
I mean, his daughter's dead. What do you think his problem is?
And then we hear the call to the detective, who was Randy McKinley, who later went on to become police chief in Bloomington and left for another job in Missouri. But at this point, he was detective, and he was contacted, and he was asked about it. And at first, he sounded a little bit surprised, like at first he'd heard about it. And then he sounded like, "Oh, yeah, I was just getting ready to call him." So you get a little bit of an ambiguous reaction from him.
Yeah, I mean, you almost have a sense of like, oh yeah, that's there on my desk to take care of one of these days. If you thought, I mean, I don't think they took his calls very seriously. I mean, if you thought somebody's calling and saying that there was a murder here and you need to look more closely and it happened today, wouldn't a normal reaction be, I'm hopping on this and I'm going to look at it? Now, I'm sure that they have to deal with lots of folks who react to things inappropriately or whatever. But I just thought the response was kind of, well, lackadaisical is the impression I got. What'd you think, Willis?
Well, yeah, I'm a little.
I mean, you're a father of a cop, so
I'm a little befuddled as to the reaction there. I don't know. I'm not a cop. I am the father of a cop, but I'm not a cop, so I don't know day to day what a cop's life is like. I don't know from when they come in the morning to they go home at night, or vice versa, what they have to handle, the things they have to do, the paperwork they have to do. I know there's a lot of paperwork in police work, and maybe sometimes in the midst of things, it's hard to prioritize. Maybe what should come first. Maybe someone's in the middle of a very important report, and they've been asked to pull away and go cover something else. I'm trying to figure out myself what's going on here, and I'm having trouble doing it.
A 3-year-old girl dies under mysterious circumstances in a community that almost never has a murder. I don't know about you. That would strike me as something that should be on the top of the hopper for priorities.
Yeah, but as we've said before, this was not being thought of by the police as a criminal case. It was a death, an unfortunate death of a 3-year-old girl that up to this point we assume was natural causes. This is the first time we're hearing it in real time here, the first time that the police have been informed that, although it has happened over and over the period of a few hours, that, hey, this maybe was a murder.
Yeah, and I think it's telling that the person who's calling and saying that is the father. Now, the prosecutors have argued the fact that he is saying that it's a murder before the police think it's a murder shows that he had knowledge that it was a murder and that he must have been the perpetrator of this crime. I guess it could be interpreted that way. Or it could be he's getting some insight that maybe he thinks the police missed.
As far as we know, that's the final time he called 911 on that particular day, right, Scott?
Yes, it is.
And there is obvious anger, frustration in his voice. Again, he did give the wrong phone number. He did give the wrong address. That may have been part of the reason why the police didn't come out, obviously. But there's more to it than that, because had he murdered his own child, would he even be calling police to ask them to investigate a murder at his house?
That's what doesn't make any sense to me at all. He is just demanding, hey, send a team of detectives out here. Look at this. Have a forensic team. Look at this. Like, if you were the killer, would you do that? And I think it's interesting, as far as forensics go, there was nothing definitive ever found that pointed to Barton McNeil having committed this crime.
We know later on that he suspected his ex-girlfriend, Masuk, of committing this crime, but did he suspect her at the time he was making these calls to 911?
I went to Menard Correctional Center in Southern Illinois and posed that question to Bart, and this is what he had to say about that.
The first person to suspect that Masuk might have had something to do with Christina's death was not me. It was Christina's mother, Tita, who saw Masuk parked in front of my apartment. And she asked me, I mean, she's grieving too. She's crying, but in between her sobs, she's asking, did Masuk spend the night last night? And I'm like, darn, the heck, no, she didn't. She's like, are you sure? I'm like, yeah, I'm positive. There's no way. And, I spent the night alone. She's like, well, what's Masuk's car doing out there? I said, I don't know. She just showed up. So, and I knew what Tita was getting at. Tita thought that somehow Christina's death was related to Masuk's presence at my apartment. And I said, no, you're wrong. That's not what happened. Christina must have died of natural causes or something. I'm not thinking remotely that Christina's death might have been the result of foul play. I had not looked at the window or examined the window yet. Had I would have known in an instant that somebody had broken into that apartment during the course of the night. I would have known in an instant that Christina's death was murdered, and I would have known in an instant, as I eventually did, that Masuk was behind Christina's death.
That's Barton McNeil speaking from Menard Correctional Center down in Southern Illinois. Scott Reeder, investigative journalist and creator of Suspect Convictions, went down and spoke with Barton McNeil, accused and convicted of murdering his 3-year-old daughter. He's contesting that. Menard Prison, that's a place that you really don't want to spend any time, do you, Scott?
Well, Willis, if you've ever seen the movie Shawshank Redemption, Menard is like 10 times worse. It is a nasty, nasty place. It was built in 1850s, before the Civil War. That's how long that's been a prison in Illinois. And it looks and it feels ancient. The men are locked up in cages. I mean, it is one scary place, and it's a very violent place. And I can't imagine what it's like to live there day in, day out.
Especially if you are a person who didn't commit a crime that you've been convicted of, which Barton alleges that that's the case. And I suppose Menard is full of people who feel that way, but Barton seems to have a legitimate complaint here.
Yes. I mean, but even those folks who committed the crimes and will readily assess that they deserve to be in prison will tell you Menard is a pretty horrible place to be. It is an ancient prison. It's just not a nice place to be at.
It's Suspect Convictions. I'm Willis Kern, and on this week's episode, we've been listening to audio from 911 calls in connection with the death of 3-year-old Christina McNeil in June of 1998. Along with investigative journalist Scott Reeder, we're trying to determine the genuineness of both her father, Barton, who made the calls and was later convicted of her death, and the detectives who were apparently trying to figure out if they should take seriously his claim that a murder had, in fact, taken place. In coming episodes of Suspect Convictions, we'll examine the weather reports from that day. Prosecutors contend that despite rain, there were no tracks found in the house. You've heard about the signs of a break-in described by Barton McNeil, including a damaged window screen. There were spider webs found along the screen, something prosecutors say proves the window was damaged days or weeks before Christina's death. Could spiders have woven a web in just a few hours? You'll hear from a spider expert about that possibility. We'll zero in on forensic reports from the case. And next week during Suspect Convictions, we'll take a closer look at the case against Barton McNeil from local prosecutors, who today stand by their predecessor's decision 18 years ago to seek his conviction.
The alternate theory here now that's being proposed is just defies the rules of science and physics almost, and common sense.
And you'll hear from the Illinois Innocence Project about why they think there are enough questions concerning Christina McNeil's death to warrant reopening the case.
Sook killed her husband's mother, the female that person cared for the most. Christina McNeil was the person that Barton McNeil cared for the most.
That's next time on Suspect Convictions. Production assistance comes from WUIS Springfield and Sean Crawford. Special thanks to Colin Thompson, WGLT General Manager R.C. McBride, and the production staff of Sound Ideas, including Mike McCurdy, Charlie Schlenker, and Ryan Denham. I'm Willis Kern. Join us next week for Suspect Convictions.
Folks, I really highly recommend a podcast that I've been listening to. It's called Once Upon a Crime. It's put out by a young woman named Esther Ludlow. She just does terrific work. She has an absolutely superb narrative voice, and she tells a different story about a different crime every week. Like right now, I'm listening to a podcast put out by her about a woman who's woven a web of lies about herself and deceiving people all around her. It's called The Belle Gibson Story. It's set in Australia. It's an absolutely terrific story to listen to, and I just feel like I'm there when Esther tells the story. She does a terrific job of picking different topics every week. I really recommend this podcast. Again, it's called Once Upon a Crime.